We have achieved great things. We have made giant leaps. We've gone far beyond what we thought was possible. But we have only just begun. Our future in space is unlimited, and it will benefit all humanity. But it will take hard work, new technologies, advanced financing models, and enabling public policy. The Beyond Earth Institute is creating a policy and legal framework to enable the creation of economically vibrant communities beyond Earth. We will engage all stakeholders on critical policy issues: property rights in space, norms of behavior, conflict resolution protocols, filling the technology gaps, exploring new financing mechanisms, and making space settlement an agreed goal of the U.S. and its allies. Beyond Earth is committed to the true purpose of why we go to space. Join us on this journey.
Everyone, welcome to this Beyond Earth webinar. We're really glad that you could join us. My name is Steve Wolf. I'm the president and founder of the Institute. I'm really looking forward to this incredible discussion today on navigating the new space policy landscape. Before I do that, I want to just share a little bit about our next Beyond Earth Symposium that's taking place in February 24th and 25th. You might have heard this through the grapevine that we have set a date for this. We're going to again be at American University, Washington College of Law. We are gathering an incredible array of speakers and programming and sponsors. We have a special treat for everyone today because we have a website for the symposium, and I'm going to put that in the chat field. And if you are so inclined, you can register today to be one of the first people to register for the event. It's going to be so special. You can look forward to hearing more about it in the coming weeks. I want to particularly thank those people on the call who have taken the opportunity to donate to the Beyond Earth for this particular program and other programs. Every donation counts, and so it's greatly appreciated. Thank you. Our the topic today could not be more relevant to the mission of the Beyond Earth Institute, which is to develop the policy and legal framework that will enable humans to live and work and thrive in space in the coming decades. It certainly has been a very tumultuous year with this current administration in terms of budget cuts and staff reductions that many of us are trying to deal with. And of course, NASA is no exception to this, what's been going on. But the bright side of this all is that the administration, as many of you know, has been very supportive of continuing with the Artemis moon program, with the commercial LEO destination program, and of course, we have made very clear announcements that we support human missions to Mars in the next decade. On the other side, though, there are some concerns, some areas where we have to take into consideration. For example, as we well know, a big part, NASA's budget is being reduced by over 25%. The biggest hit is occurring in the science areas, and that's unfortunate. Just full stop. I mean, but particularly when it comes to human spaceflight, they're cutting, for example, the Human Research Program, which is responsible for researching, how humans can survive in space and develop ways of mitigating those issues. That particular budget is slated or is recommended to be reduced by almost 75%. And that's just one example. Now, of course, we hope that Congress will do the right thing and increase that, but we see this trend down. I mean, we certainly don't want to be sending people to the moon and Mars without having the full advantage of being able to live and thrive in space and certainly to be able to come back. So we need that kind of science to understand what we need to know in order to get to Mars and back. So with the panel today, of course, we're focusing on NASA's directives and White House executive orders that have come out over the last month or so. And could not be more timely with the panel that we've assembled. And at this point, I'd like to turn over the program in the very able hands of Courtney Stadd, the Beyond Earth executive vice president, who's done such a tremendous job. And if we could bring him on camera, and so much for us. And he's been a pillar in the space industry with multiple Democrat and Republican administrations, many of the critical agencies, and has really been a leader for commercial space policy all that time. So with that, Courtney, I'll turn the program over to you.
All right, Steve, thank you very much for those kind words. And again, welcome everyone to today's webinar, Navigating the New Policy Landscape, What the Latest Executive Order Means for Your Business. So let me set the stage. The new executive order, titled Enabling Competition in the Commercial Space Industry, is front and center of our discussion. And it does a number of things that can have real pragmatic impacts, and we'll get into that during the discussion. But at a very top level, first, it streamlines launch and reentry regulations, at least that's the aspiration. Second, it accelerates spaceport infrastructure, including faster environmental reviews. And third, it authorizes novel activities like in-space manufacturing and orbital refueling. Again, there are many other aspects to it, and we'll get into that during the discussion. Industry reaction has been mostly positive. Some critics are concerned about the environmental reviews and to what extent speeding them up too quickly might put communities and ecosystems at risk. But by and large, it's been pretty positive reaction to it. There are two additional NASA directives that at least are worth noting, although, again, they're not the centerpiece of today's discussion, but I think worth keeping in mind. One is on the commercial LEO destination, CLD. NASA's moving towards Space Act agreements away from fixed price approach to contracting to help foster commercial space stations after the ISS, the International Space Station, is currently scheduled to be terminated around 2030. The goal of the CLD memorandum that the acting administrator put out is very clear, that NASA should be only one customer and not the sole customer, and certainly not the sole source of financing. And nuclear power. The NASA leadership has called for a 100 kilowatt fission reactor by 2030. And arguably that's essential if we're going to be serious about sustained lunar and deep space operations. Obviously, solar energy and other sources are being looked at as well. Anyway, that's the backdrop for today's conversation, and we couldn't ask for a stronger panel. Their bios are online, but let me very quickly summarize what they bring to this conversation. Jim Muncy, very well known in our community at large, has shaped space policy for decades. During his tenure at at Congress, the White House, the private sector. And in fact, he was also key to this particular executive order. Alicia Brown, executive director of the Commercial Space Federation. She, under the auspices of the president, Dave Cavosa, are doing tremendous things to help raise the profile of Commercial Space Federation in Washington. And just the other day on Capitol Hill, they released the Redshift report, highlighting China's breathtaking progress in space. And I would urge all of you out there not to walk, but run to their website. And Alicia kindly is going to provide that link in the chat to download a copy, at the very minimum, of the executive summary. And if you have an opportunity, the full report itself. It's quite sobering and shows you the depth of the competition internationally. And Alicia brings, in her own right, a formidable congressional and agency experience to her portfolio. And last but not least, Charles Miller, again, well known to our community, brings very deep entrepreneurial and policy chops. He's founded several successful space ventures and was the head of NASA's landing team for the current White House. So he brings very relevant insights to this discussion. Now, what do I hope that we all get out of today's conversation? One, a clearer sense of what this executive order signals to both industry and government. Policies come and go, but my sense is that this EO has some very pragmatic near-term impacts, and I really want to get into that. Insight into how these directives, particularly the EO, but the extent to which the panelists want to get into the CLD and so forth, could unlock real commercial momentum starting in low Earth orbit and ultimately advance over time beyond Earth's vision for off-planet migration that Steve Wolf referred to. And then, as time allows, a few moments to have a frank discussion about the competitive threat from China and how industry and government together can respond. For those of you who've been part of our webinars in the past, the format is straightforward. I'm going to ask each of the panelists to spend about 5 or so minutes describing what they view as the key important aspects of the executive order. And again, if they want to get into the CLD or whatever else, and why our commercial space industry needs to be engaged in their effective execution. After the panelists make their introductory comments, I'll trigger a follow-on conversation. But meanwhile, those of you who've been part of webinars that I've moderated, you know that I put a big emphasis on audience participation. So please feel free to generate comments, questions in the chat, and we'll do our best between now and the end of this to get to your comments and questions. We're going to run this to roughly around 1:20-ish, and then I know Steve Wolf wants to come back on with some closing comments. So with that, let me start with Jim Muncy, and then we'll move to Alicia, and then Charles Miller. So Jim, you're on.
Hey, thank you, everyone. The executive order is the first major White House initiative on space that we've seen beyond the aborted nomination of Jared Isaacman as NASA administrator. And it is titled, enabling competitiveness for the commercial space industry. But I actually think it's more strategic than that. To this administration, space is not just a federal program, and arguably it's not just an industry sector to be paid attention to that's important to the economy, but space is actually a domain, a physical place that we want American civilization and other nations to expand into to pursue freedom and opportunity and new discoveries. The way we're going to explore space sustainably is not just by having the federal government set goals and carry out activities in partnership with both traditional contractors and new commercial suppliers, but to actually expand the American economy into space. And so it's vital that we set up the frameworks, the regulatory frameworks to enable that. It's vital that we ensure that we not only have one large company succeeding in the commercial launch arena, but that we have several companies. And so we need to make sure that the regulatory burdens on new launch entrants are lower so that more entrants can come into the field and compete and innovate and try different ideas. It is important to increase our launch infrastructure in this country so that we can support more activities. Florida is running out of, in the current paradigm of how they run launch operations there, Florida may be running out of launch sites and time slots in which launches can be conducted. So we need other states to step up. We need offshore launch infrastructure like the Spaceport Company is working on, and others. And that's what's going to enable further orders of magnitude reduction in the cost of access to space. We've already seen a dramatic increase in the range and creativity of commercial space ventures simply because of initially the NanoRacks enabled CubeSat launches from ISS, and now the Falcon 9 transporter missions that SpaceX launches. So having more access to space, having cheaper access to space is already stimulating huge new applications in satellite and potentially human spaceflight as well. The goal is not just to go to low Earth orbit, though. The goal is to expand beyond Earth orbit into the moon and Mars, etc. And that means all of the potential activities in space need to be, per the Outer Space Treaty, authorized and supervised by the US government. So one of the provisions of the executive order basically tells the Secretary of Commerce to create a voluntary transactional regime for overseeing such commercial activities, where a commercial company that wants to pursue a space hotel or a lunar base activity or go mine an asteroid will tell the Department of Commerce, here's what we're planning to do, here's our awareness of and responsibilities regarding other actors, commercial actors and governmental actors out there in space where we're going to be operating, and here's how we'll keep from crashing into them, and other relevant details. And in exchange for providing that information to the Department of Commerce will turn around and say, yea, verily, you are certified and approved to go conduct your commercial space activities. And therefore, we have a non-bureaucratic, non-regulatory, it's not, no one's giving the Department of Commerce the right to say everyone has to get permission from us. Instead, the Commerce Department will create a permission structure that is so easy to use and so beneficial to the industry that they will pursue it that way. And I can tell you that the Department of Commerce is already in action implementing that part of the executive order. That's what's going to make it possible for there to be a simple, streamlined way for every single commercial actor that wants to go do something creative in space, even on the moon, even on Mars, even on Pluto, if that is economically and technically feasible, you'll be able to do that under this regime. Okay. So that's a sort of big, broad picture of why deregulation or regulatory reform is important. It's not just important for the industry of commercial space, it's actually important for our national goals in space beyond that.
Thank you, Jim. That was a terrific way to start us off. Alicia, you're on.
Great. Thanks so much, Courtney and Beyond Earth Institute, for having me and for putting this on today. I really agree wholeheartedly with everything Jim Muncy has said. And, this executive order, I think, is the culmination of, frankly, decades of work from folks like Jim and others in the space industry who have been, seeing what is coming around the horizon with the growth of commercial space and the variety of different kinds of commercial space activities, and trying to say, we're not asking you to rubber stamp everything we want to do, but can we put in place a common sense framework for government to authorize and license activities in space? Launch is one that has been really, I think, in everyone's front of view because we've seen the delays, on the pad as new entrants are coming online. I think Bill Gerstenmaier, who had an amazing career at NASA and is now at SpaceX, said it best in testimony before the Senate Commerce Committee once. It should never be paperwork that's holding us back from the launch pad. That should be the easy part, not the building of the rockets should be the hard part, not getting approval to fly the rocket. So I think just a huge round of applause for a big step forward, hopefully, with this executive order. The proof is going to be in implementation. There's a lot of good direction, but we have to see how the agencies take this and run with it. And I want to say that, this is in the context too of this China report that the Commercial Space Federation just put out. China is, of course, the big boogeyman here in Washington, D.C. It's part of every space conversation that I've had for 4 or 5 years now. And so what the report is aiming to do is to put in an unclassified open source data in one place, broken down by sector, to say, this is what China has promised they're going to do, and this is the progress they are making along those promises. And we're at the point today where I think the U.S. is still firmly in the lead in each of the areas that we examine, but China is just over our shoulder in many cases, or accelerating and ready to pass us. So that's the context, and that's what's at stake, and what we're trying to educate folks here in Washington, D.C. about why implementing some of these reforms is so important. And just to carry on to Jim's last point, these programs, these companies are now in partnership with the U.S. government, whether it's NASA, whether it's Department of Defense, or the intelligence community. They are using these capabilities to fulfill our own national goals or our own national security needs. And so therefore, it's in the U.S. government's best interest to make sure that these companies can fly and can operate in space. I'll leave it there. Thanks.
And thank you for stressing the national security aspect of it. Really appreciate that. Charles?
Thank you, Courtney. Thank you, Steve. First of all, I'd like to thank the Beyond Earth Institute. I think you guys do amazing work. You provide a new way of thinking about space, and I think you do the entire industry and the nation and the world a great service by bringing a slightly different context. And I just like to go from there. Context is everything in how you think about space. And you can come to a completely different decision about what we should be doing in a lot of these tough, gnarly, complex issues. But if you have a different context, it can make everything a lot clearer. So in the context, and I'll just say a couple different contexts here that I think the Beyond Earth Institute does a great service in. The first one is, why are we going to space? And that is, the Beyond Earth's mission is basically settlement. It's the large scale human expansion off the planet, right? You're not excited by 5 or 6 people in space. I know where you come from, and you're thinking thousands or millions of people in space. And if we certainly have the potential to do that, but what you do determines whether we ever live into that future. The second, certainly in context here, is China. China is a near peer competitor. We're in the middle of a great power competition, and it changes how you think about this. So these issues that we're discussing, the executive order and the CLD and nuclear energy memo coming out of the NASA administrator, all need to be thought of in that context, these two contexts. The first, and I'll just say, is the large-scale industrialization of space, leveraging commercial space, right? The context here is in a near-peer competition with China. We can't outspin China. We can't outmanufacture them. Our one remaining great competitive advantage, I would call it our superpower, is the American free enterprise spirit, the American entrepreneur. And as a nation, we should be leveraging that power. And this executive order, if you look at it, does exactly that, right? It elevates the Office of Space Commerce out of NOAA. That was just crazy. In the context of Office of Space Commerce being a big deal, space commercialization, you wouldn't put it in NOAA. Same thing with putting OCST, Office of Commercial Space Transportation, in the Department of under FAA. FAA is a stable, stagnant industry. We're going to have the exact opposite in the growth of space transportation. We need somebody who might have been in the 1930s, in the early days of aviation. And how do you have a light-handed regulation? Because speed is critical, right? To beat China in space, right? In this competition, we need to go faster because we know they're going fast. And we need to also have some regulation, but we need to have a new strategy in how to do that. So I give great credit to the White House and these executive orders. A lot of these ideas that are in the executive order have been discussed for decades. I can remember having a debate about some of these things 10, 15, 20 years ago. So great credit to the White House on getting this done. They clearly get the context. The president talked about the frontier as a special kind of place in his speeches, and this comes out in some of these executive orders. Now, with the CLD, I'll just say it's a great start. What was in the CLD was actually recommended by the transition team about fixing the strategy to go faster to enable these commercial LEO destination companies to go to orbit. I'll just say a half a loaf is better than none, right? There's other people who want a full loaf, and I totally get it. That there's other things to be done, but I think it's the great start. Phil McAllister had a great write-up on this of why this is necessary. I'll just say we are kind of mind melded on that. But another piece of context is I think a continuous heartbeat is the wrong goal. And the reason is it is small ball. Our goal in low Earth orbit should be 1,000 people traveling to and from space in the next decade. It should be dozens of continuous heartbeats in low Earth orbit in a decade. And if you think about it, we are on the verge of cheap access to space. We are watching in front of us the development of a reusable launch vehicle by one centibillionaire. We know that another one is also developing, and a decabillionaire is building an RLV. We should be leveraging and riding that wave as a national strategy. We need a grand strategy to win in space. And so leveraging this commercial space industry, I think, is where we actually should be going. And CLD is part of that. And also the call for a permanent human base on the moon, which I also think should be large scale as well. Like not just a few people on the moon, but a much larger vision of what is possible. And I think we much more to work on and look forward to this discussion.
That's great. Thank you. Provocative as always, Charles, but I love your vision for the future. Certainly, from my standpoint, certainly buy into it. Wonder if I could actually maybe start with you, Charles, and then move to Alicia, then Jim. I was on, I'll be specific. Commercial Space Federation had sponsored this panel the other day. It was an excellent panel in the wake of the release of the China report. But I was struck by several of the government relations executives from various commercial space ventures, and they all were complaining about the government shifting direction, shifting goals, not particularly focusing on the administration as historically, and saying that, hey, isn't it time that we just establish some certainty and direction and let's get on with it. And as I was hearing them talk about that, I was thinking to myself, well, but the way I read the executive order and the way I've been hearing it be communicated by you all, and from what has been I think, a very business-friendly set of signals out of the administration, my sense, and I'd like to get your reaction, that the administration is actually signaling to space entrepreneurs, as long as they meet fundamental public safety, national security concerns, go ahead. Feel free to forge ahead in the spirit of proceeding, and don't let bureaucratic inertia impede your progress. Get going, and don't be held captive to the inside the beltway processes. So, am I right or
I,
wrong?
I
What do you think,
I
Steve?
think there is no excuse for, you're as an entrepreneur, if you have a great idea, you just go start it. And there has never been a better time to start a commercial space business.
Yeah,
And I think the idea that, oh, it's the bureaucracy of DC and licenses and regulatory is totally gone. That makes no sense. If you had a problem, you will get a hearing and they'll fix it, right? That it's I don't hear entrepreneurs saying that ever again, right? I'm hearing entrepreneurs saying, "Hey, coming up with a good business idea and signing up customers is the problem, not
right.
regulatory or
I agree.
licensing." I think that's kind of off the table.
Charles, let me now ask Alicia. After all, Alicia, your membership is a healthy cross section of the industry. Uh, what's your sense? And you were there. I was talking about your forum the other day. So,
Sure, yeah. So, I mean, continuity of purpose is something that we talk about in the space community all the time because it takes a long time for development of new systems, often, longer than the 4-year cycle of who's in charge in the administration. And frankly, I've spent the last 4 years at NASA at the Biden administration, and we were very proud of our record of continuity to stay the course to go back to the moon and hopes that we could start to make progress on some of these goals that have been stated here today. I think when we say continuity of purpose, though, we should be allowing for changes as new technologies and capabilities come online. There's always going to be a way probably to do things smarter, faster, cheaper, and we should be open to those changes in architecture. To drill down maybe a little bit on CLDs and talk about the recent changes there. In CLDs in particular, as well as some other areas of new space ventures, the government is still going to be, for better or worse, an anchor tenant of these capabilities in the near term. And therefore, it is still important, what NASA and what the Congress feels about these programs, because, the investor community takes, watches those moves very closely from the administration and Congress and takes that as a signal of where they should be, following private sector investments. Because again, there's not going to be a huge commercial market in some of these areas, at least in the beginning of these programs. So I think that's what the panel was pulling on a bit on Tuesday, is that when there are big changes to programs and how they're going to be executed, sometimes the investor community has a little bit of trouble keeping up with that. And the CLD change is one that has happened recently, and there's some, I think, division among the companies participating in the CLD market as to whether they like those changes or not. I'll leave it there maybe, and I know we wanted to get into a CLD conversation a little bit later, and I'm happy to explain a little bit more about where the various camps are.
that'd be terrific. I look forward to that. Jim, feel free to augment, but as you're answering, I'd also like to get your following perspective. So much depends on execution. You and I were part of the review in the first Trump administration on the streamlining the launch regulations, primarily Part 450.
Well,
And I
thank you
think
so
it's fair to
much
say
for
that you and
reminding me
I,
of the pain and suffering of that period. Thank you.
indeed, and we were not exactly impressed with the outcome. So as you answer, augment whatever you wish you just heard, do you have any greater confidence that as part of the EO, the streamlining of these licensing regulations will happen in a way that industry has been pushing for a long, long time?
Well, I don't think the agencies, and in particular the FAA, had ever seen anything like the first Trump administration when they came in and they said they wanted to cut 3 regulations for every new regulation that was created. And, industry had been agitating for years for essentially adding some substance to the reusable launch vehicle regulations, which were performance-based instead of prescriptive.
Right.
And we asked for some more detail and some more substance there. and FAA suddenly under the gun. FAA AST was not known as a frequent regulator. They didn't produce new regulations every year, or even every few years. It was like once every 5 to 10 years, they would produce a new set of regulations about something. And so, and big FAA wanted most of there's a whole ecosystem inside federal agencies that produce regulation. There are lawyers involved, there are economists involved that decide what the cost impact of the regulations are. And there's a limited amount of bandwidth in any given agency for producing regulations. And the FAA has a limited amount of bandwidth. And there's this really huge, big established industry called aviation, which consumes 99% of the bandwidth for writing regulations inside the FAA. And industry was coming along and saying, we need to have new regulations that are better for launch systems. And big FAA said, well, it'll take 7 years to produce it, and it'll be really hard, and we're not sure we can give you the resources for that. And then the White House came in and said, boom, you're going to do it. And the White House and the FAA said, oh God, they're paying attention to us. Oh, what do we do? And they clutched, and they did what was most convenient or comfortable, psychologically comfortable for them, which was to take the regulations that go back to the 1980s and your time at OCST,
right,
Courtney, for regulating expendable launch vehicles, and they smashed them together with the reusable launch vehicle regulations. And they basically created a Franken regulation that was literally a combination of both, which is not what industry wanted.
Yeah. So do you have a reason to be more confident, more optimistic this time around?
Well, I think we've been to the party. We're all a little smarter. Whether or not the fact that they came out early in this administration and said, we're going to improve it. We're going to move beyond what we did last time in the first Trump administration, and we're actually going to fix the problem this time. That's a necessary step.
Yeah.
But as you say, the devil will be in the details. How do they implement it? There is not permanent leadership at the Office of Commercial Space Transportation right now. There are supposed to be some people named in the near future. The executive order specifies that there shall be a lead official that is not a career person, but a political appointee to run AST in the future.
Yeah.
And we'll see who they hire and how they manage the process.
Let me add to that for the audience's edification. Secretary of Transportation Sean Duffy, who's also, of course, double-hatted as the acting NASA administrator. His office back at Department of Transportation is putting out a solicitation for candidates political to be a special advisor to the Secretary for Space. So that may be hopefully a positive sign as well. Okay. So from a concrete standpoint, maybe Alicia, back to you. With this EO, are you finding that your membership, the industry, as a whole, are responding positively and engaged and looking to the executive order as helping to facilitate both in their financing, engaging with customers, and so forth? What is the feedback you're getting so far? And where's the skepticism as well? But go ahead.
I don't know of any. I mean, other than we have to see how things are implemented, everyone I think is really thrilled with this. These are concepts that again, we've been talking about for so long that, I think everyone was generally on the same page that these were the things that needed to happen. Just thinking about the investor community that you mentioned, we've been talking for a long time about this gap in authorization and supervision. And certainly, we've filled it in certain ways with the payload review process. I don't want to imply that missions are going up there that aren't authorized and supervised. But this really does give people certainty. And I think that helps the investor community to have assurance that there is a process set up that if I want to go fly this, really new, exciting thing in space, or even things like the commercial space stations, they needed to make sure that they were going to have a pathway that somewhere in the government could give them the approval to get to the launch pad and to operate in space. And so I think that, presuming that is how the Department of Commerce moves forward with it, as Jim mentioned, hopefully setting up a voluntary mechanism in advance of Congress maybe one day acting and giving the department actual statutory authority. I think a lot of people are very willing because number one, the Office of Space Commerce over the past few years has been really forward-leaning, really open with industry. People are excited to work with that office and think that they are going to set up a process that makes a lot of sense. And then again, just to have the certainty that there is someone that has the authority that has been vested by the White House to give them a yes or no, and hopefully in a very transparent way. Something that we've had problems with in various regulatory regimes in the past is that you get a no, but you don't know why. You don't know if it's someone in the national security community that has a problem with this, and there's no pathway to adjudication to relieve those concerns, to explain what you want to do. If there are real, concerns, to make changes to your mission parameters or profiles. So I think just in general, a lot of excitement and a lot of support for how things are going to move forward under the EO.
Let me add to this. Steve Millhiser said that the Office of Space Commerce looking at a 47% cut. And again, we don't want to get into the midst of the budgetary dynamics and so forth, but I'm curious whether the membership, whether you're finding or sort of getting mixed signals, right? On the one hand, we've spent the last half an hour on a very, I think you all agree, is a very positive direction set with the EEO, and yet, like our friends at the Office of Space Commerce going through these cuts and so forth, you get a sense of mixed messages that the industry is still trying to grapple with.
Yeah, and I'm not totally sure what the final outcome is going to be for FY25 appropriations, and of course FY26 is very unknown.
Yeah.
There was a lot of new money in the Office of Space Commerce to implement the TRACS program, the Space Situational Awareness Program. I think it's been interesting that you've seen almost unanimously industry come together and say, hey, we still think it's a great idea that Office of Commerce provide this service as a basic free government-wide service. It's really important for our businesses that everyone knows where everyone else is in space, so that we can maneuver if need be. Not to mention, of course, there's a lot of international presence in space as well. And we want to have, someone who can help us navigate, what could potentially be tricky issues in space if there is a predicted conjunction between a U.S. asset and a foreign asset. So my understanding is maybe some of those cuts are related to the TRACS program. I think we're all very hopeful, though, that program moves forward. And I wonder, too, if Department of Commerce is a really big organization. And Office of Space Commerce is a really small piece of that. As folks have said, buried under NOAA doesn't really make sense with the mission of NOAA. So part of me wonders if maybe it's just an education effort within the department that needs to happen, and to say, hey, this is what you have been tasked with by Congress and the White House, and this is how things are going. Our story is certainly, and everyone that I talk to in industry story, is that Office of Space Commerce is doing a great job. We should actually be giving them more things to do, because they have been so successful so far.
Yeah. Well said. Thank you.
Can I just add on to that?
Yeah, Jim, go ahead.
She said, for example, our friend and a great hero of the space community, Chairman Bob Walker, former House Science Committee chairman, back in 1984, authored a change to the Organic NASA Act that gave NASA the job of promoting the fullest possible commercial use of space. and people like Charles Miller and Phil McAllister and Alan Lindenmoyer and others within NASA over the years, certainly Lori Garver back during the Obama administration, use that statutory language as an argument for things like COTS and commercial crew and now the CLD program and other things. But the fact is that NASA is not expert in the economy. NASA is not expert in commerce. NASA is primarily a scientific and engineering organization. And there are some very smart people in NASA who understand economics and understand business. But we have this entire department called the Commerce Department that's actually very skilled and knowledgeable in economics and business development and things like that. And we would really like, for example, the Office of Space Commerce to be looking at NASA and what some of their goals are and saying, well, if we really want to expand the economy to the moon, so we don't just have a NASA facility on the moon, but we actually have a thriving economic sphere of American companies on the moon, then maybe we should do it this way. Okay. And then they're an independent, outside, authoritative experts to say we should go about exploring the moon this way rather than that way, because that's what's going to produce the greatest economic payoff for the taxpayer.
Jim, if I may, just to remind the younger members of the audience that actually what you're speaking to has precedent. During the Reagan era, where actually Member Commerce was the co-chair actually of a cabinet council with NASA. And the idea was exactly what you're talking about, that Commerce, which has the statutory responsibility for promoting, advocating, and so forth for American business, would bring that expertise to the table. It would be nice to see it institutionalized, if I may. If I may, Charles, you have spent years block and tackling out in the finance world. So if anybody has the scar tissue with securing capital and customers, it's certainly you. So I've noticed that among our questions, Jeff and Dr. Weiss, let me combine them. Jeff is saying, hey, I see NASA as an anchored customer for at least another 5-10 years for these different space stations, commercial stations, to succeed. If funding gets cut for microgravity research, I just don't see how they'll be profitable. And then Dr. Weiss followed in and supported that. Said, yeah, funding is key. The switch in the funding model, fixed price to Space Act, throws, she feels, a rather significant unknown into the equation. If a company doesn't have the revenue to invest in their LEO or lunar development, how can they be viable? So I wonder if you could tackle that.
Well, thank you, Courtney. Let's see. So this goes back to airmail. This is a long tradition in America. We know how to have the government be an anchor tenant. The U.S. Post Office, if you go back to the 20s, was the anchor tenant customer for many of America's airlines that grew into existence. And we forget about that. We forget our history. It's like the government was absolutely critical for a national airline system because commercial passenger travel wasn't big enough market yet. In fact, the DC-3 until the mid-30s, when it came on, you could not close a business case based on pure passenger travel. The airmail was critical for all the airlines across the nation. The same is true today. We're looking at the same thing in space stations, right? So this is my personal opinion, but somebody who headed up the transition team may have made recommendations along these lines that the budgets for human research program, that the budget for INSPA, the In-Space Applications Program, the budget for the Office of Biological Physical Research should be increased and committed to for the next 5-10 years as the anchor tenant customer for these CLDs, that we needed multiple companies. In fact, somebody may have recommended that we create a partial gravity research program at 1.6G and 3Hg that if we didn't do that, we weren't serious about going the humans to Mars or to the moon, right? And that all of these different line items should be the anchor tenant customers for commercial space stations in low Earth orbit. That closes the business case. And I'm telling you, if NASA was serious and the US government was serious about a lot more private investment going into low Earth orbit space stations, signaling that we were serious would open up the investor spigots, right? That it is not a static question. It is a dynamic question. The problem is not many people understand that dynamic issue. So I think it is absolutely, I'm going to use the word imperative, that we get this right, that we ramp up, we become the world leader in low Earth orbit as well as on the moon and Mars, and open up the solar system. And by signaling our intention here, we do that. Now, I'm going to add one more thing. Like, we're getting into the second half of the loaf. I believe, and someone may have recommended this, that these customers inside NASA, the Human Research Program, INSPA, Office of Biological or Physical Research, should all be put together as customers in low Earth orbit, as their own entity, and be put in charge of Space Operations Mission Directorate. That they are the in-state customer, the user, so they should be in charge of how this all works, right? That if you were serious about this long-term transition from a ISS and then transitioning to CLDs to multiple commercial stations, that makes total sense.
Let me poke at that for a second. So what would that look like organizationally, what you just recommended?
Well, you basically just need to switch leadership a little bit, rather than the microgravity research people and the INSPA people and the Office of Biological Physical Research. You'd have to move OBPR, Office of Biological Physical Research, from SMD over to SOMD. But then I just put them in charge. The AA for SOMD becomes somebody from who's the end user customer, right? And you make this transition go a lot easier to commercial space stations. They're obviously using the ISS right now, but you need somebody who's responsible for the transition, who cares about a successful transition.
Yeah.
And you also need to give them a little more resources.
Charles, before I leave you, are you seeing signs in the administration that or supporting this type of approach, or
Well, I can't talk about that,
Yeah.
Courtney, what signs, but I can tell you what my personal recommendations are of like what we need to do.
Yeah.
This gap, this is a self-imposed mistake to create a gap and then drop the ball and lose leadership in low Earth orbit, right? With good management and leadership and understanding this transition of the handoff, we can make sure we don't drop the ball and we keep global leadership in low Earth orbit, and we stimulate, right? So just signaling, which is words out of your mouth coming out of the White House, we can get investors to write big checks to fund these commercial space stations. Just being a good anchor tenant customer and make all the difference. And that is the reason, so the CLD memo that flipped it on its head, that the certification for the space stations comes later, right? That was that bureaucracy of having to certify everything before you even built it. If you actually think of about the perspective, most of us here have built houses or live in houses. You don't get an architect and blueprints and you tell the builder, certify 3,000 different things before you even do it. Now you have a plan. It meets all the requirements that you're going to have, but it's not certified until after you build it. You send in an inspector, and if the inspector finds something wrong, the builder fixes it, right? you flip it on its head. To do it, to certify it, pre-certify before you build the thing, just results in slowdown, driving up costs and expense. So the CLD memo that Secretary Duffy signed was very needed.
That's very useful. Thank you so much. So it sounds like the EO, from your perspective, not I want to put words in your mouth, Charles, but it certainly establishes a very positive framework within which to pursue and enable what you've been laying out here the last few minutes. At least that's
Yes, if there is any entrepreneurial CEO in space that says, "Oh, I'm not starting a company now because I can't because of the regulatory environment,"
right.
I would laugh at them. They
Okay.
they they should, they're not right for the job. The real CEOs, I just don't think they think that's a problem, and it's been a problem for many years. Courtney, you had the problem.
Oh yeah.
Many people decades ago, this was the problem. I
Yeah.
think we can say we're not getting rid of regulation. We need to have public safety and other things, but I think we've got this rock out of the way, and now it's just about closing business cases.
Yeah.
That's the next problem. I would say that's hard. Regulatory was a hard problem. I think the next issue is how do we close business cases and go back to history, look at the Transcontinental Railroad. How do we close their business case? How do we, stimulate and recapture world leadership in aviation? Right. And
Yeah.
it was a national security crisis. And how do we beat China in space? It's about closing business cases.
Gotcha. Hey, Jim, back to Jim Muncy. Charles put a lot out there. I'd like to get your overall response.
Well, I know that Alicia had some things she wanted to say about the CLD thing.
Yeah.
But if you wanted to go first, Alicia, that would be fine.
That's fine. Alicia, you want to respond on the CLD, some perspectives? And
Sure.
whatever you want to respond to what you've heard from Charles as well.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, first of all, I think we are very excited all to see Secretary Duffy in place at NASA. I think he's really providing some strong and steady leadership that was needed at the agency, some political leadership. Again, having my experience at the agency is that even if there are as a political team in place, without someone who's really able to go and talk to the White House, it's really hard to make some of these big decisions that need to be made. And CLDs was certainly one of them that the industry all year has been clamoring for. How are we moving forward on this program? There was an expectation that we were going to move next to a draft RFP. So I think the change and doing another round of Space Act agreements caught some people by surprise, and they're adjusting to that and having those conversations with NASA. Someone asked me a couple days ago, about I get asked a lot about like, what is commercial space? Who are your customers? And we were talking about it in the context of, the U.S. government as a customer. And they said, is it just the money that's important? Is that what you need out of us? And I said, no, I mean, the money is important, but there's a lot more than that. You're asking U.S. companies to invest a significant amount of private capital in developing huge new assets that are of national importance. What they need is a certainty and to see a pathway to profitability on a specific timeline. And so I think the CLDs, the new directive maybe changed that timeline for some of the companies. And they're kind of adjusting within now how things are going to move forward. I think one piece that is a little still unclear, and going back to this anchor tenancy thing that we all seem to be in agreement on, was, of course, there was part of the CLD memo that says we are going to, the microgravity strategy published last year is no longer in effect. I think they were really trying to pull out the continuous heartbeat part of that. And they said the requirement is going to be a minimum of 1 month. Now, I know that this is going to be worked out later in an actual acquisition. This is still just a directive. But that part, I think, did give people some initial concern because, as we've been saying all along, many of them are going to rely on the U.S. government to be one of their main customers for the beginning of the space stations and for a little bit of time into that. But everything Charles was saying on the demand side, the science side, I think is such a key part of this. And that's why so many of us have been raising concerns about reductions we're seeing already in microgravity and LEO funding on space station that has already started. That is where we're going to have pharmaceutical breakthroughs, have medical breakthroughs. And also that work is going to eventually be the customer to move over to CLDs. And so if we are, starting to defund that stuff now, there is a lot of concern about, well, what exactly is going to be left? What are we going to be doing on station for the next 5 years other than fixing the bathrooms if there's no money for research?
Yeah. I laugh from the fact that you're tragically might be right. Jim?
So Courtney, thank you. I just wanted to give Alicia a chance to lay out that there are real concerns in the CLD companies to make sure, because they want to make sure that there's going to be a there. My view on the CLD directive is that there's been NASA has as an institution, the Space Operations Mission Directorate as an institution has been focusing on replacing the ISS, on making sure that there is a national asset available to the nation for the, you can call it the National Lab in Space, which is what, we, thanks to Senator Hutchison, we call the ISS now. But what we really want, I would argue, what the taxpayers, if they were, to engage in this, what I think the economy, I think what the authors of the Redshift report for CSF would say is, what we need is a space station industry. We need multiple facilities and a thriving ecosphere of LEO platforms that is developing new and better capabilities to support human research in low Earth orbit and human economic activity in low Earth orbit. And NASA will be an important customer of that. Perhaps the National Institutes of Health will be an important customer of that. Perhaps DOD could be a customer of that. And certainly there are other nations that want to invest in actually using low Earth orbit to benefit their economies and their nations. So the goal is to shift from sort of a program to create a single or maybe two replacements for ISS to a program to start an industry. And by using Space Act agreements and by delaying the issue of certification to meet NASA's requirements, what we're doing is we're giving everyone's a bunch of companies some money to move as quickly as they can, just like we did with COTS, just like we did in the early phases of Commercial Crew, to get this industry jump started, and then work the hard issues of certification to meet NASA's needs, et cetera, but as a negotiation based on the practicality of what industry is actually fielded. I think it's very important that we get away from the idea of, just as we needed to get away from the idea of a shuttle replacement, right, a system that was going to replace the shuttle. What we did is we supplanted it with Falcon 9 and Antares and now Vulcan and New Glenn and other things. Okay, that there wasn't a replacement for the space shuttle that we created. We created a whole industry. Yeah. That's what we want to do in low Earth orbit. We want to get away from the idea of a single federal asset that is part of the program to an industry that has that is dynamic and growing and can change over time.
Just a reminder to our audience that it took Elon and SpaceX with litigation, right, to open up both with NASA and the Air Force. So they were not certainly welcome, the commercial launch vehicles with open arms at the time, but now it's become obviously embedded fundamentally into the ecosystem, but it just is an example of what the transaction costs can be.
Yeah, I remember back in 2003, 2004, NASA's response to the Columbia accident was to give Kistler a sole source
Right.
award
Right.
of development for cargo resupply of ISS.
Jim, a valued member of our BE family, Michael Mealing, makes the point that there was heartburn about the 1 month minimum, that only requirement, and never getting to a growing permanent presence. And I know that Charles made his very astute comments about about the nature of continuity and orbit, and their pluses and minuses. But just wondering if, before we move on, if you had any comment about
it's my understanding that that's just a going in assumption. That's the first level
okay.
that they want industry to be able to meet. Show us that you can do something to keep people alive for a month in low Earth orbit, but that's an easier bar that more companies can pursue. So they open the aperture to more concepts, to more providers for this phase. And then they say, okay, obviously we're going to want to buy more than that. We aren't just going to have astronauts in low Earth orbit for 1 month a year. We're going to want more than that. And
okay.
But
I think I have
at the beginning, they start it simple.
Good. Sorry, Jim. Charles?
Yeah, I have a few things I'd like to add here to help kind of clarify all the noise.
Please.
So first of all, I went back and I suggested earlier that there's at least 3 parts of NASA that are customers for low Earth orbit space stations, right? So there's the Human Research Program, which is basically the human adaptation to microgravity. That's one requirement. InSpa is the manufacturing research program to take things to where they are actually ready to be transitioned to commercial industry, and you have a clean breakthrough and a capability of a new in-space manufacturing thing. That's a completely different requirement. And the Office of the Biological and Physical Research is studying fundamental applications of the science of microgravity. That's a different requirement. And then I suggested a fourth, which was partial gravity, right? 1/6 human adaptation to 1/6G, right? Human adaptation is the 3HG and life. Can we even have children in space? If we have a permanent base in the moon, can people live there long term? Right? These are critical questions about what we're doing in space, and we don't even answer that. If you look at those requirements, they drive you to different solutions. And so there's going to be multiple stations. It's natural there's going to be multiple stations. So the CLD memo said the minimum is 30 days space station. Well, that's the minimum for any bidder.
Right.
But NASA's requirements clearly require lots of humans in space permanently. The Human Research Program has still got a ton of work to do and needs long-term human presence in space to complete that research. That's a different requirement. So NASA's end requirements, I believe, at the end of the day will capture all of that, but the minimum bid from any provider must be 30 days in space.
Useful context. Jeff asked another question. He said, will the ISS National Lab have a role in the new commercial space arena? Have they been a net positive, and would more funding for them help hinder or help the development of the LEO economy? Charles, what's your...
Well, I think ISS National Lab served a purpose for the time. It acted as a easier on-way ramp for other agencies and maybe commercial companies to deal with the ISS, which NASA wasn't, they basically admitting we're not good at that. But I don't think in a world where you have commercial space stations, I don't think the commercial space stations want another layer between them and their commercial customers. They will do that better. And so the need for an ISS national lab, is just like getting between them and the end customer. If I was a commercial space station owner operator, I say, I don't need that. You're just, I want to have the relationship with the end customer.
Right.
I mean,
All right.
I think
Right.
just if I could just
Yeah.
jump in, if NASA or if some part of the federal government wants to encourage industry or researchers beyond NASA's own mission needs, if they want to foster low Earth orbit research, low Earth orbit commercial product development, whatever, then what they should do is give out vouchers. Okay, they should give out microgravity vouchers or partial gravity vouchers that you can take to a CLD company and say, okay, I want to buy this much usage, and I have $1 million voucher from the Commerce Department, from NIST, okay, or I want to do an environmental sensor that I think might have a new commercial application, and I have a voucher from NOAA, okay? Or I have a technology that might be useful for the military that I want to demonstrate cheaply on a space station, so I have a voucher from DoD. And you go and buy the service, just like you would buy a launch. Just as you would buy a ride on a transporter mission, you buy a slice of a human being's time or access to a platform, and you don't have an organization deciding who gets, as a gatekeeper. Instead, you just give out resources, and then the scientists or the researchers go to the CLD marketplace and say, well, I have $1 million to spend. Who can get me the best deal?
I think that's a great idea, Jim.
So,
if I could jump in here,
please, Alicia, yeah, go ahead.
My thoughts aren't fully formed on this, but I mean, transportation is the highest cost right now to getting access to LEO. And so, I mean, I think we need to see how things develop over the next few years, but I could see some benefits still in some sort of government or quasi-government organization helping, again, go and making pots of money available to the research community to access LEO and helping defray some of those transportation costs. And I also think over the last few years, CASIS has been very helpful in helping to do outreach to other government agencies besides NASA and get NSF funded, NIH funded research into LEO. And so I could see a role in that maybe.
That's good point. I'd like to ask all of you the following, and I'll start with you, Alicia. When I look at the EO, there are a lot of moving parts associated with it, a whole bunch of different agencies with different directives and mandates and so forth. Obviously, thematically being tied together with enabling and encouraging commercial space, as we've spent the last 45 minutes discussing. But in stark contrast, I would submit to the first administration, where our mutual friend Scott Pace and the National Space Council was our one-stop shop. If we had issues about where things stood in terms of execution and so forth, they were an email or a phone number away. I got to be perfectly honest. I'm not sure who's actually tracking all of it, who's the one-stop shop. And Alicia, you and Dave Cavosa, CSF, are probably the most well-networked entity I know in this world. You've been up on the Hill, the White House, so forth. Any advice? And then we keep hearing rumors about space councils perhaps being established and so forth. But to those in the audience that say, okay, we get it, EO looks like it's on the right track, still a lot of questions about execution, but okay, great. Who can we go to if we have issues or whatever, to sort of the one-stop shop? What's your feedback?
Yeah. Although in fairness, I mean, OMB was always still a pretty powerful player in the first Trump administration, as well as, another access of where power is concentrated. It was really nice, I think, to have Space Council to help kind of champion space issues in the administration. This EO, I think, was really led by the National Economic Council, and they're the ones, collecting the homework from the agencies to make sure it's implemented. So that, as well as OSTP, has kind of been where we're touching base to make sure things go well. But it sounds, in conversations with senior leadership at DOT and Department of Commerce, I think they understand the mission and they seem really excited to make progress here. So Space Council I think is great, but it's works best when there is a vice president that is also really engaged and going to back up the executive secretary. My understanding is that's what Scott had. So every White House organizes a little bit differently. So,
but it sounds like my takeaway from where you sit is the center of gravity, Economic Council, OSTP, and that at least for the moment, those seem to be the two epicenters to.
And OMB still, of course, is
and OMB, of course,
player. But yeah, that's where I think a lot of this has been coming from.
Okay, Jim Muncy, you agree? You have another perspective?
No, I totally agree. I mean, I don't think we should count out the recreation of the Space Council at all yet. I know that there are efforts underway to pursue that. I think it's dramatically better for this administration to be focusing on space as an economic issue rather than our days going back to Reagan with space cordoned off under the NSC
Right. Yeah,
as
that was
a
not good.
National Security Council fiefdom, because that didn't lend itself towards commercial approaches. That didn't lend itself towards a small d democratization of space, which I think we're all committed to here, especially in Beyond Earth. So,
yeah,
I've talked to people on the NEC staff. I've talked to people on OSDP. Not to criticize, but one of the elements of the EO that I had more to do with relating to Article 6 had a more strategic purpose to it than just solving the Article 6 issue. And by that I mean the purpose was to send the message that the space frontier is open, that we want American business, American entrepreneurs. We want people to grow up and think that they can make money in space and they have the right to try to make money in space. And the federal government is going to give them a permission slip to go make money in space, because that has a salutary psychological effect on the country. That has a beneficial impact on the spirit of the country, to know that space isn't just the playground of the government or the playground of a few billionaires or the playground of the military. It's a playground that individuals can go participate in. And we want, because we're Americans, we want everyone to be able to play and everyone to have a sense of a stake in it and an ownership of it. And I think some of that strategic messaging was lost by the way they sort of crafted a bunch of pieces together. I don't think that's bad, but I would like to hear some more Trumpian rhetoric. I would like to hear some more vision out of the White House on why they think it's important for the commercial space industry to compete, and not just that they do want it to be able to compete.
Very well put. Charles, we have another minute or so before Steve Wolf joins us. Comments?
Well, I am very hopeful today. There's obviously a lot of change and disruption and a little chaos. But I actually think there's things that if we stay focused on, lots of great things are happening in the space industry. Going back to the beginning, we are on an inflection point that's leading towards cheap access to space. Right? I'll just point out that we all know about Starship, but there's half a dozen other companies investing hundreds of millions to billions in reusable launch vehicles.
Yeah.
And if you go back, 5 years ago, we were doing launches per month. Today, we're doing launches per week, right? In the not too distant future, we're going to be doing launches per day.
Yeah.
And I think I can see how we could get there. We could be doing launches per hour.
Mm-hmm.
So this changes everything, right? All this discussion about scarcity of commercial space stations and can debate between Moon and Mars, that's a scarcity mindset. I would actually suggest we put on an abundance mindset. And we're going to do tons of things in space. And the real thing to thinking about is what's our strategy to make sure we leverage that and take maximum advantage of this inflection point that's called ultra low cost access to space. It's coming, and we're going to do great things in space. I'll just leave it there.
That's a great comment to end on, and it reminds me back in the 80s, Charles, you and Jim will remember Limits to Growth. Remember the Club
Oh, yes.
of Rome? And that was one of the catalysts for the great late Jerry O'Neill, who talked about his own vision for opening up the endless abundance of the cosmos and led to his space settlement concepts and so forth. So here we are. But what's wonderful is I'll speak for me to have lived long enough to see the entrepreneurial genius. And as I always tell people, many of them will fail, bankrupt, so forth. But there's such robustness and such a dynamic out there that I remain very optimistic. And this conversation has only fed it, that we are indeed at that inflection point that you referenced. And I think with a lot of challenges ahead of us, no doubt, we're going to see a tremendous opening up of the cosmos. And I think the EO, it's become clear from the last hour, is vital to opening it up. Again, we're going to, all of us, are going to put the execution of this under a magnifying glass because so much is at stake. But I think there's a lot of reason to be optimistic.
Courtney?
So with that, I want to thank all of you for your time. And Steve Wolf, we're going to turn the microphone back to you, sir.
Well, Courtney, I wanted to come in a little bit early because I really wanted to join the conversation a little bit. So that was your exit presentation,
Okay.
but maybe we can keep this going
Sure.
a little bit. I have to say though, I am, and I'm going to pull everybody in now, I think, because I am so inspired by what you all have been saying. Alicia, you're still there. Alicia, if you could come back on camera, I'd like to add you to this. So, so much of what you said, I really appreciate, especially Charles and Jim for, elevating this discussion and helping us sort of look beyond where I guess we call it, missions of, what are the stated immediate missions that we're looking for, that are coming online. But really, those are the next steps, right? We're just trying to make sure that we're taking the proper next steps that ultimately are going to get us to that future of vision that we're all excited about, having hundreds and thousands and even maybe millions of people living in space one day. But we do have to come back into where we are now. We can only take the next step. We can't take the next 20 steps right away. So I really appreciate us, and that's really what Beyond Earth Institute is trying to bring into these conversations. Full disclosure, Charles is a recent addition to our advisors group. Jim has been there literally from the very, very, very genesis of the Beyond Earth Institute. So thank you, Jim and Alicia. It's so great to make your acquaintance. I really like so much of what you all were discussing. The one topic actually I would like to bring up, Courtney, if it's okay,
Of course.
is on this question of certification of the CLD. Some of you may be aware that we submitted comments that were requested by NASA relating to the revised CLD or C3DO plan or proposal, and under the leadership of Steve Hazer in our group, some of you may know who he is. and he's been beating this drum for a while, that we should be qualifying. We should move to a position of qualifying the CLDs rather than certifying them. And Charles, you made a very good point specifically about what certification means and how it could just bog down the whole situation. I would love your further comments or response on that idea that we should move to a qualifying regime rather than this sort of onerous certification process. And I'll just open up to anyone.
Well, I'll just add it. I think that the issue here is that America knows how to do this. We have, I believe, over $100 trillion in assets in America called real estate. And we can learn so much from how this, space stations are just real estate in a different domain, right? We know how to do this. We know how to finance it. A lot of these are leased, or sometimes it's lease owned, sometimes it's outright owned. But somebody builds those structures, right? A space station is just a structure with commercial financing and maybe ownership operation with anchor tenants. Real estate is a very well known industry, how you structure the deals, how you contract for it, how do you manage the risk for all the partners, how does the customer get what they need and what they want. And I think we should learn from that. And they don't, certify 1,000 different things based on a piece of paper. They qualify, yeah, this looks like it meets our requirements, right? And they build it and then they inspect it and then like, okay, the lights aren't turning on in this bedroom, fix it, right? The Wi-Fi isn't working in this part of the house, fix it, right? The heating and air conditioning, it's like there's a process here of what you do first and then how you get there in a way that's affordable and moves, at a decent pace.
Mhm. Excellent. Jim, any thoughts? Looks like Alicia might have left.
So my only my only thought about qualification and certification is, if you want to create barriers to entry, then you force people to sign up to an onerous regime of proving that your product or service is going to meet every single possible requirement, not only that the government has spelled out now, but we'll think of between now and the time that you actually go through certification. In fact, for commercial crew, certification was a negotiated process. It was worked out between industry and the government. And the people who had run the shuttle program, who were trying to human rate the commercial crew vehicles, were told they could not have everything, that they were not in charge, that not every cost of industry was being borne by the government, and therefore there needed to be compromise. I think, I tend to say that whenever I see the phrase human rated, I either know that the person doesn't know what they're talking about, or they plan to use human rating as an argument to get the contract they want funded and not other contracts funded, because they have a bias that they want a heritage contractor or a heritage approach to space to be favored. That's just wrong. We need to open the aperture and figure out lots of new safe ways to keep humans alive in space. Our goal for CLDs should be very simple. How do we get as many experiments in space commerce going on simultaneously so that we learn new ways to create value in low Earth orbit? And by creating as many experiments as fast as possible in creating economic value in low Earth orbit, we can get towards a self-sustaining low Earth orbit economy where NASA isn't paying all the freight anymore.
Right.
That's what we want. Okay. So a CLD strategy that gets us that many experiments as cheap, we lower the cost of keeping a person alive in low Earth orbit. Okay, if we can lower the cost of trying new business ideas out in low Earth orbit, if we can, not just the transportation to get there, but everything else that you do there. The cost of, I mean, right now, the space station, I was just reading an essay somewhere saying that the cost of a person's hour at ISS is a few $100,000. Well, why aren't we trying to find a way to get the price of a person in low Earth orbit to be $10,000 an hour, so that more people can afford to invest in buying an astronaut's time, or a private sector researcher's time, to try out a business idea. That's what we want. We want to drive costs down, enable more attempts at creating value, and literally let 1,000 flowers bloom, and then 10,000, then 100,000. That's what we want. We want a burgeoning economy in low Earth orbit.
Yeah. If I may, and Steve, it's 2:31. I know you want to let folks go here in a moment, but I noticed that Dr. Weiss had noted that policy is great, but funding reinforces policy. And I would say, with enormous respect to Dr. Weiss, that we don't have enough time to engage that, but I do think one of the takeaways from here is Charles and Jim's point about the inflection point, that this is not any longer a simple matter of government funding correlating to creating all sorts of opportunities. There's really a tremendous amount of happening on the private sector side, and more so, we believe, will be facilitated by the EO. Having said that, it is certainly we certainly can have a discussion somewhere in the future, Steve. Webinar, whatever you decide, to get more into the nitty-gritty on what Dr. Weiss views as a disconnect. But I think if she will allow me, and I say this with great respect, I think Charles is right. I think that is old think, and I think that, I know it's traumatic and there's a lot of disruption going on, but I do think we're entering a new era, a new dynamic. That we need to really be thoughtful about what the very positive implications are. So
the budget is going to be whatever the budget's going to be.
Yeah.
But whatever the budget is we should spend and invest in a way to maximize the actual economic benefit. Okay. We shouldn't pick one company and give all the money to one company and they deliver whatever they can deliver. We need to find a way to seed lots of different activities in parallel.
And Steve, finally, we didn't have a chance to get into it on China, but I do recommend people read that unclassified red shift, because it is very sobering. The Chinese have been very strategic, very systematic in meeting all the goals that they've laid, most of the goals they've laid out in 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And we're lagging. We're lagging on national security side, civil commercial in some ways. And another webinar discussion at some point will be, how do you harness whole of government, whole of industry to be systematic? And I will end on a very provocative note. I've worked directly for 4 administrators. I worked for 2 secretaries of transportation. And I agree with Alicia, who, by the way, her computer froze. That's why we lost her. So she sends her apologies. But Sean Duffy, charismatic. I think he's bringing a necessary role of leadership. But my provocative comment is that I think it is fundamentally impossible to be double-hatted. You cannot run NASA part-time. It's too complex. It's too multifaceted. And I think it's sooner than later they have to put a man or woman in there that's thinking, eating, and breathing. And frankly, if I could take from Secretary of Defense Hegseth's point about a warrior culture, there needs to be a warrior culture at NASA. If you don't come in on Saturday, don't bother coming in on Monday. If you go to the Starship parking lot at 2, 3 in the morning, it's crowded. And that has to be the level of galvanizing the talent of industry and government in order to beat our adversary. that's necessary. And I'm not seeing that. And we're now 9 months into the administration. The president laid down a very, very challenging gauntlet. And it'd be tough if we'd started on January 22nd. We're now almost in October. And I'm very concerned about the lack of focus and aggressiveness. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Steve.
And we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you, Courtney. I think what you're pointing out is the complexity of the number of issues that we could get into. An hour and a half is really not
Easy.
not a lot of time to really dig into these. But I think we did cover quite a bit of really really interesting subject matter, and I was very inspired by much of the conversation. So looking forward to continuing this conversation in different formats and covering different topics. You're right, we really didn't get much into the military dimension at all. And I recently, a whole other area. I mean, I recently was talking to someone where there's this sense that civil and military space is sort of coming together, coming closer together. What does that mean, and what's the potential there? I did, to sign off, I did put in a link to the Beyond Earth Symposium website in the chat field. I encourage you to look at that. We thank again all the donors, and I thank all of you for joining us, and look forward to seeing you at the next webinar, and certainly, hopefully, we'll see a bunch of you at the symposium next February. So with that, thank you.